July 23, 1983. It was supposed to be just another regular flight over the skies of Canada. A Boeing 767 was on its way from Montreal to Edmonton. Everything seemed normal until something totally unexpected happened. Thousands of feet in the air. The plane ran out of fuel completely. The engines shut down. The aircraft was now a glider. In aviation history, there are very few incidents quite like what happened to Air Canada Flight 143. The pilots had to glide the plane down from 41,000 feet, like a giant powerless glider. And they had to land it on an inactive military base that had been turned into a racetrack, Gimli Airport. Oh, and did we mention there were 69 passengers on board? This wasn't just a technical error. It was a deadly mix of human mistakes, miscommunication, and confusion over measurement units. It became a textbook example of how small errors can snowball into life-threatening situations. Today we're breaking down the incredible story of what's now known as the Gimli Glider, minute by minute. We'll explore how not just a plane, but an entire chain of procedures and systems failed, and how, despite all odds, the crew pulled off one of the most heroic emergency landings in aviation history. If you're ready, let's dive into the unbelievable story of Air Canada Flight 143, the descent and the struggle to land. As Air Canada Flight 143 started dropping from 35,000 feet, it basically turned into a giant glider, quietly cutting through the sky without a single engine running. With both engines dead, there was no more thrust. The only thing keeping them in the air was gravity, altitude, and speed. It's the kind of emergency commercial pilots train for in simulators, but almost never face in real life. Captain Bob Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal quickly calculated their glide ratio, how far they could travel horizontally for every foot they dropped. Turns out, it was about 12 to 1. So, from 35,000 feet, they had maybe 70 to 80 miles of glide range left. But gliding a massive Boeing 767 is nothing like flying a lightweight sailplane. The jet was heavy, hard to control without power, and required constant, precise adjustments to keep from stalling. And the worst part? They were still way too far from the airport they were supposed to land at. Emergency navigation and a bold idea. That's when First Officer Quintal brought up a wild idea. What if they aimed for an old Royal Canadian Air Force base in Gimli, Manitoba? He remembered it from his military days and thought the runway might still be usable. What he didn't know was that it had been shut down for commercial flights and was now used as a drag racing track. Still, with barely any power and very little time, Pearson and Quintal really didn't have many choices. Using just their backup instruments and gut instinct, they set their course for Gimli. The ram air turbine kicks in. Luckily, the Boeing 767 had one last trick up its sleeve. A small device called the ram air turbine, or RAT. It's basically a little propeller that pops out when the engines fail, using the rushing air to generate just enough power to keep basic systems running. It wasn't much, just enough to power the flight controls and a few instruments. There was no autopilot, no flaps or slats to slow down for landing, no thrust reversers to help stop once they hit the ground. Even talking to air traffic control was hit or miss. The pilots were pretty much flying blind, relying on visuals and experience. Getting to Gimli, a real-life race against gravity. As they got close to Gimli, Captain Pearson realized they were still way too high and might fly right over the runway. In gliding, energy management is everything. Drop too low and you crash short. Stay too high and you overshoot. So Pearson did something very few pilots have ever tried in a jet that size. He pulled off a forward slip. That's a move usually done in small planes. To drop altitude fast without picking up speed, it involves tilting the plane one way while pushing the rudder the other and increasing drag. It worked. They lost altitude quickly, but now they had to stick the landing with no flaps. Higher speed and almost no room for error. Pearson would have to touch down perfectly, keep the bounce minimal, and brake just enough to stop without blowing a tire. What they didn't know: a drag strip ahead. As they lined up to land, neither Pearson nor Quintal realized the runway had been turned into a drag racing strip. There were people on the tarmac, spectators, trailers, even race cars. It wasn't until seconds before touchdown that folks on the ground noticed the giant plane coming straight at them. Panic broke out, but Pearson stayed calm. He kept the nose up and brought the plane down in a firm but controlled landing. One of the main tires blew on impact. The nose gear collapsed, partly from the hard landing and partly from the lack of hydraulic pressure. The plane skidded to a halt. Just before reaching the crowd, the emergency slides were deployed. Incredibly, no one was killed. There were only a few minor injuries. The passengers had just lived through what experts would later call one of the most incredible engine-out landings in aviation history. Crisis not over yet. As the plane came to a stop, one of the flight attendants smelled smoke. A small fire had broken out near the nose gear, probably from sparks igniting hydraulic fluid or other flammable material. Some ground crew and bystanders rushed in with fire extinguishers and managed to put it out before it could spread. The danger wasn't totally gone, but the worst had been avoided. In the days that followed, the media, the aviation world, and the public would start piecing together the incredible story: what went wrong, what went right, and how a string of human errors somehow ended in one of the most heroic landings ever made. This is the story of the Gimli Glider. Technical oversight and a cascade of errors. The Boeing 767 calculates its fuel quantity using a system called the Fuel Quantity Information System, FQIS, which is displayed in the cockpit. This system has two independent processor channels. Each can calculate fuel data individually and cross-check the other. If one channel fails, the other can continue functioning alone. But in such cases, manual fuel measurements are required before flight. However, if both channels fail, no fuel reading is displayed, and the aircraft is deemed unfit for flight. Due to previous inconsistencies in the FQIS on other 767's, Boeing issued a service bulletin for routine checks. After a smooth flight from Toronto to Edmonton, a technician noticed the FQIS had failed again. The cockpit gauges were blank. A similar issue had occurred earlier that month, and a temporary workaround was applied by disabling the second channel. Unfortunately, this condition was ambiguously recorded in maintenance logs with a note stating "Fuel queue indication, blank, channel 2 off." The aircraft then flew from Edmonton to Montreal without issue. The technician advised the pilot that fuel would need to be measured manually, but the pilot misunderstood, believing the problem had been ongoing since Toronto. Upon arrival in Montreal, a new crew prepared for the next flight. The previous pilot relayed the issue to Captain Pearson, who assumed the FQIS was entirely inoperative. Maintenance personnel tried to restore the second channel to fix the system, but this action caused both channels to fail, leaving the fuel gauges blank. The circuit breaker was re-tagged, but not pulled, rendering the system completely unusable. Pearson saw the blank gauges and the tagged circuit breaker. confirming what he had expected. According to the aircraft's minimum equipment list, MEL, this situation should have grounded the plane. However, Pearson believed the flight could proceed safely if fuel was measured manually. The Boeing 767 was a modern aircraft operated solely by 2 pilots. Older aircraft had flight engineers who handled complex fuel calculations. But in this case, no one was clearly designated for that task. 2 technicians and 2 pilots attempted to calculate the required fuel. They struggled with technical confusion, paperwork issues, and unit conversions. Captain Pearson planned to fly directly to Edmonton from Montreal without stopping in Ottawa for refueling. They needed 22,300 kilograms of fuel. There were already 7,682 liters in the tanks. To convert this to kilograms, they used the wrong density figure, mistakenly applying pounds per liter instead of kilograms. The correct density was 0.803 kg/L, but the conversion was done using 1.77 B/L. As a result, instead of adding 20,088 liters, they added only 4,917 liters, less than half the required amount. The flight management computer, FQIS, would normally track fuel usage, but with the FQIS inoperative, data had to be entered manually. At Ottawa, they repeated the same miscalculation, once again adding too little fuel. Ironically, on the previous leg from Edmonton to Montreal, the issue hadn't occurred because the FQIS was working and the correct amount of fuel had been added. Investigation and aftermath. An internal investigation at Air Canada led to the suspension of Captain Pearson for 6 months and First Officer Quintal for 2 weeks. 3 maintenance crew members were also disciplined. Following appeals and widespread public support, both pilots returned to duty and were later honored with the prestigious Flight Safety Foundation Award in 1985 for their exceptional airmanship. The aircraft was temporarily repaired at Gimli and then flown to Winnipeg for full restoration. It returned to commercial service and flew for another 25 years before its final flight in 2008. The remarkable story was dramatized in the 1995 television movie Falling from the Sky, Flight 174, and featured in the Discovery Channel series Mayday under the title Gimli Glider. In 2013, the aircraft was put up for auction but failed to find a buyer. By 2014, it was dismantled. Some of its fuselage pieces were turned into limited edition luggage tags for collectors. In 2017, a permanent museum exhibit opened in Gimli to honor the event, featuring cockpit simulators and memorabilia. It stands today as a tribute to human resilience and aviation safety. Lessons in aviation history. The Gimli Glider incident highlighted how technology, communication, and human judgment must align seamlessly in aviation. The cascading errors from a malfunctioning fuel system to a miscalculated fuel load could have ended in disaster. But it was calm leadership, rigorous training, and teamwork under pressure that turned near tragedy into a case study of survival and skill. Air Canada Flight 143, forever known as the Gimli Glider, is more than just an aviation mishap. It's a testament to how ordinary people can perform extraordinary feats in moments of crisis. What do you think was the biggest lesson from this event? Human error, system failure, or crisis leadership? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoy deep dives into real aviation history, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, fly safe and stay curious.